Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel Athlete Fanatics. In this video, I'll be reviewing the final chapter of Brad Gilbert's book titled Winning Ugly. This final chapter is called Mind Game, Psyching, and Gamesmanship. What it does is really tie the three sections of this book together in a bow. In this section, Brad Gilbert really dives deep into sharing the mental games that his competitors played with him during his ATP career. He shares some of his games played by Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe, Ivan Lendl, and how he was able to learn from his experiences, rise above them, and then add those experiences to his arsenal in becoming a more successful and better tennis player. And starting off this chapter, Brad Gilbert really shares his personal trials and tribulations playing against Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe. Now, both of them are very flamboyant characters. Many people back in the day may know of them throwing the most temper tantrums on the court. To the novice eyes, this may seem like they have anger management, which they might do, but there was a method to the madness. They didn't really throw temper tantrums because they were mad. They utilize this as a tool to not only put pressure on the umpire, the crowd, but also to disturb the rhythm of their opponent, which is actually a common theme in tennis when everyone is playing mind games, that you are trying to throw your opponents off their groove, off their momentum, to really establish balance into this match in order for you to get back and get back to your normal self, right? So Brad Gilbert, for his first experience he shared was really a war of words with John McEnroe, in that during one of the matches he played with John McEnroe, he said that later on he knew that the match was lost before the first serve. And the reason he said this was because the interesting comment that John McEnroe made in his press interview leading up to the match. So John McEnroe said that Brad Gilbert, the way that he swings at the ball, wouldn't crack an egg, right? And some of them may question, how did this throw Brad Gilbert off his game? Well, if you watch Brad Gilbert play, if you search him on YouTube, his strokes are not the most aesthetically pleasing and not the most powerful. So by saying this, John McEnroe was trying to get inside Brad Gilbert's head, right? If he can't get Brad Gilbert to really prove John McEnroe wrong, then Brad Gilbert would really play into this game and try to swing as hard as he can during the match, which essentially is not his self. And essentially this is what happened. Brad Gilbert went into the match with a lot of anger, tried to hit a lot of winners, tried to hit hard, tried to play outside of his comfort zone, and lost in 2 straight sets. So he even mentioned that after the game in the locker room, John McEnroe walked past him and made a cheeky comment, which he was able to laugh off in the end because he knew that John McEnroe had a method to the madness when saying that his strokes couldn't crack an egg. The second story he told was Jimmy Connors. Now, Brad Gilbert didn't really have the best of record playing against both John McEnroe or Jimmy Connors, but in a specific match, he was at match point and ended up getting the match point. Now, the story doesn't stop from there. He thought he had the win, and he wanted to jump us joyously to celebrate this sweet victory. But as we all know, the sore loser, or the strategic tennis player that Jimmy Connors is, totally threw a temper tantrum, cursing, using words that Brad Gilbert explained wasn't PG-13 rated. So he really put pressure on the umpire and made a lot of commotion from the tennis crowd too, saying that the ball that Brad Gilbert hit was out instead of in. Now, Jimmy Connors at that time had a lot of, I would say, was able to put pressure on the umpire in really recalling the point as out. And at this point, as you can imagine, putting yourself in Brad Gilbert's shoes, him being overjoyed, finally beating Jimmy Connors, finally getting over that hump, to the umpire overturning that call, anyone would be disturbed emotionally and psychologically, right? You can't be not disturbed by that because we're all human. And long story short, because of that, it totally threw him off his game, and he ended up losing the match. Now, both of these stories actually share a common theme in that these tactics may seem very primitive and low, but they were all aimed to get inside Brad Gilbert's head, so the opposition had a higher chance of winning the match, right? And Brad Gilbert really shows that how he was able to utilize these two experiences as a learning opportunity to become a better player when he played the player called Wheaton, which that player portrayed himself as an American patriot. But segueing into Ivan Lendl's psychological tactics when playing tennis. Now, Ivan Lendl was actually the polar opposite, or what I even consider the antithesis to John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors. So he mentioned that Ivan Lendl's lethal weapon was really called turtle time, right? The reason why it's called turtle time is that Ivan Lendl, he was really a wizard at controlling the pace and time of a match. Not the pace and time during rallies, but the pace and time in between the serves and breaks. So he mentioned that when Ivan Lendl was up, he would pace himself really well in order to suffocate the opponent and ride his wave of momentum. On the other hand, when he's down, he would really slow the game down, right? He really go down to tie his shoes or, watch his racket. When the opponent's trying to serve, he would stand up, signaling that he's not ready in order to throw the opponent off their game. And he even went to the length of really pinching out his eyebrows and looking at his hair. So it really showed the length that these professionals would go to in winning a game. But the essence of the story was that in a match where he played Ivan Lendl, he was up, and Ivan Lendl really threw these mental tactics in to great effect and really threw Brad Gilbert off his game. Now, I'm sure any one of you who play tennis in a recreational level or in a semi-professional, professional level have all experienced these players throughout your tennis journey. And I personally must say these are one of the most uncomfortable and annoying experiences to get through. So Brad Gilbert really shares that to really handle these type of players, you have to beat them at their own game. When you're noticing that they're deliberately trying to stall and throw you out of your rhythm, then you have to have the mental fortitude to slow the game down and to really exaggerate to slow the game down in order to let the opponent know that you recognize them playing this mental game, and B, you're not afraid to really play this mental game. And because they're already down, when you do this, it will unsettle them emotionally too. After that, Brad Gilbert really writes about how to handle these unique players in a recreational level that does a lot of hooking. Now, unlike professional matches, when we play ladder matches at the club, it's for us as players to abide by the honor code and call the ball honestly when it's in or out. Now, we all experience players that, because they're so competitive or because they're really dishonest, they call some balls out even when it's in. Well, he really talks about several avenues where you can combat this. So he says that initially, if you experience that the player may be hooking, you have to point it out, but point it out in a very polite manner, in smiling and talking to them, saying, hey, that was really close, are you sure about that? So really put the question in their head, in that you've recognized them maybe cheating or hooking, in that you're going to be on the lookout for them if they continue on this trend. And he said that more chances than not only will they recognize you doing this, but it will put pressure on the opponent to really call balls that are out in as well, right? So this is really to let them know that you're on the ball, that you're watching them, and that you won't take any cheating for an answer. But he also goes to his extent to say that tennis at the recreational level is for us to have fun. If you experience these players that are constantly hooking and will not resonate with the message that you're giving and do not want to abide by the honor code whatsoever, then it is your job to really scratch them off of your players list, right? Just forget about playing these players, because all they bring to you is really heartache, and there's no point of you playing tennis with them if it's not going to bring you any joy, and it's not being played fairly as well. So to really sum up this chapter, Brad Gilbert shares his experience playing a tennis match against an American called Wheaton, right? Now, this match, there was $2 million prize money on the line for the champion and $1 million for the second place. And he played the American Wheaton in the semifinals. And the reason why he shared his experience was that he was able to win this match because of the trials and tribulations he experienced playing Connors, McEnroe, and Lindell. And in fact, many of the scenarios that occurred in this match was actually mirroring his experiences playing those three other tennis players he's mentioned earlier in this section. So in terms of player profile, Wheaton was really a character that he portrayed himself as an American patriot in order to get the fans on his side. In terms of playing style, he had a really strong serve. And as always, Brad Gilbert, in preparing for the game, he would always have a really detailed and thought out strategy in playing this match. But one point when this match was getting really competitive, the crowd got involved. In fact, Wheaton's family members, his brother, was actually shouting from the stands to Brad Gilbert in that he was going to do something to him if he continues bickering. So essentially, it was a really hostile environment. Brad Gilbert got into not only with his brother, but also with Wheaton as well, in that when they exchanged the ends during their break, they were bumping into each other's shoulders, but Brad Gilbert would not back off, right? He would not back off. So in order to shut up Wheaton's brother, he brought the issues right to the umpire in that the brother was disturbing the match, shouting profanity, wasn't respecting the game, so they threw his brother out. And when dealing with Wheaton, he was able to maintain his cool and engage in a verbal altercation with Wheaton, but the main key point is that he didn't lose his head, right? He was able to engage in that verbal altercation with Wheaton and continue his match by sticking to his game plan, right? And if you think about it, in the beginning of this chapter, because John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors were thought of as a face of tennis, when they threw tantrums on the court, Brad Gilbert didn't really stand up for himself, right? And in the end, it threw him off his game, and he was lost because that was a turning point in shifting the momentum. Well, in playing Wheaton, he was able to learn from those two past experiences and really start, handle the confrontation in a more strategic manner, which really maximized his chances of winning. And towards the end of this match, Wheaton was not in great shape throughout all the mental and physical battles. He actually forfeited the match, and it gave Brad Gilbert a path to the finals in playing Pete Sampras. Now, in the finals, Pete Sampras played really well. Brad Gilbert did not come home with a trophy, but what he was able to do was earn a check of $1 million by coming in second place. And he was able to do that because of the learning experience he had gathered playing with against Jimmy Connors, John McEnroe, Yvonne Lindell, facing their mental games, but it was able to problem solve and rise above and beyond those games that he encountered early on in his career. And really, for me to really share my sentiments on this book, in that it really has allowed me to see tennis in a different manner. I mean, I think when I was playing basketball, people always say that the game is played 70% in the head and 30% physically. I would say that theme is more prominent in tennis compared to basketball, and nothing could be further from the truth, right? Me playing in a recreational level, I feel that the things that you may practice is not, sometimes it doesn't translate in a game, right? The game of tennis is always changing, right? There's always swings in momentum, and what I can say is that each match really has its own ebbs and flows, and it's up to us as the tennis player to really suss and sense those ebbs and flows in order and to adjust our game in order to give ourselves the best chance of winning, right? So I wrote down that Brad Gilbert, he really talks about the 3 words, which is the rule of thumb in playing the mental game of tennis, right? In that, first, you have to recognize, right? Second, you have to act, and third is that you have to capitalize, right? And I think this really explains the winning ugly concept in layman terms, in that when you're playing a tennis match, you always have to be always on the ball, always concentrating and observing your opponent's strengths and weaknesses, but at the same time really calibrating and strategizing how I can stick to my game plan, maximizing my weakness strengths while exposing the opponent's weakness, right? And this really can only be done if you're really thinking the game and thinking the game while you're playing. And in the end of this book, Andre Agassi, which was one of Brad Gilbert's pupils, actually shares his personal experience being coached by Brad Gilbert of his game, how his game went up another level. It's because when he talks to Brad Gilbert always says one word constantly, and it's think, right? You have to think the game, right? He mentioned the 5%, 90%, 5% rule, in that 5% of the time that it's going to be 5% of the time that a player on the court will be Michael Jordan, in that 5% of that, if it's 5% of the time that day, it's near impossible to beat them. But that other 90% in between is up for grabs, and most of the time it's going to be that 90% that the two oppositions are going to be fighting it out. So it's much of an even playing field for you to get the W. And at that point, where you have to know how to think the game and being open to thinking the game, that's going to be crucial for you to win the tennis match. This is the end of my book review on the book Winning Ugly by Brad Gilbert. If you're a fan of this channel, please hit the subscribe button. I would really appreciate it. And I look forward to catching you in the next video. Peace.